to give my sense of some of the new cards that were announced today. And right now, I just wanted to focus on the Lakkari Sacrifice because I think that this is a very interesting card to think about. And my impression is that it's going to be very hard to make work with any sort of consistency, right? Um, but I think that the threat of the Nether Portal, which it summons 3/2 imps, right? And the plural there is important, right? So it becomes a permanent minion on your board that then spawns 3/2 imps to the right and to the left of it every turn, right? So the first question you might have is, okay, how do we get this Nether Portal? Well, you have to discard 6 cards with the Lakkari Sacrifice card that would appear in your opening hand. And so um, my first thought was that you might want to do this card and then include it in your deck, but then be willing to mulligan it if you didn't have a 1-drop, right? So I don't think that you would want to actually play Lakkari Sacrifice on turn 1. In Disco Lock, generally tempo is very important. So generally, the ideal is to play Flame Imp in many situations on turn 1. If not, you would want to play um, Voidwalker, right? So Voidwalker, Flame Imp are generally your top 1-drops. Uh, but Disco Lock on the whole kind of fell out because it was just sort of unable to keep up with Pirate Warrior, which became really the dominant aggro meta. Um, so is Lakkari Sacrifice likely to change that? And I think the answer is, well, it's gonna be a very different deck than what we've thought as discard lock up until now. And the reason for that is because generally even a discard oriented discard lock um, would really only discard about 5 cards in a game it was going to win, right? So even though the deck is built around discarding, um, hitting that 6 point would not be that common, at least in the old system. You'd want to open with a Flame Imp on turn 1 or a Voidwalker. You might use a Soulfire on turn 2. So Soulfire or Darkshire Librarian, or in some lists, Succubus would be your first discard. So in turn 2, you might discard a card. And then a lot of the time, you actually would not discard on turn 3. You would play Darkshire Councilman or Imp Gang Boss, generally trying to avoid playing Silverboard Golem, trying to get your other minions out so that Silverboard Golem would come out when you discard. Then turn 4 would be some combination of the others. So generally, it would be turn 4 you would try to get down your Malchazar's Imp, and then maybe off Malchazar's Imp you would play another Succubus, or you'd play a Darkshire Librarian. So now on turns 2 and 4 you would discard a card, right? So by turn 4 you have discarded 2, maybe 3 cards. And that would be maximum, right? And then on turn 5, you would play Doomguard. And generally, you want the game to be over pretty soon, right? You don't all. Sometimes you do play the second Doomguard, but sometimes the second Doomguard might get discarded by one of your other cards because you just couldn't avoid it. You had to maintain tempo. Um, and then some games you would play the second Doom card with just no cards in hand, right? So those cards would not actually be discarded. So yeah, generally when once both of once the Malchazar's imps are dead, once those 2 imps are dead, you generally would play discard cards with no cards in hand, right? You'd play your discard card, then you'd tap, get another card, and play that. Generally, trying to win the game, ideally, really, uh, before turn 7, right? I mean, you don't want to, ideally somewhere in here you would discard a Silver War Golem, get him on the board. You'd be hitting face with some of your minions. Ideally, Darkshire would still be alive, and he'd be hitting face just about every turn. Or, maybe if you two-dropped a Succubus, should be ideally still alive. A lot of the time, not. Um, but it's a very aggressive deck, and just in the same way that Pirate Warrior was really predicated on winning the game before they could drop Reno Jackson, um, Disco Lock was very much the same way. And so, yes, certainly some games you're going to discard the maximum number, which would be something like 7, right? You're almost never going to discard more than 7 cards. So basically, what I'm saying here is that with Lakkari Sacrifice, if you mulligan it, you will never activate it. At that point, it's a dead card, right? Because in no disco Ardlock can you really discard more than 7 cards total, which means if you discard 3 cards before you play Lakkari Sacrifice, your deck will run out of steam, really, before you can ever play it. So if you play it, if you plan for it to ever come into activation, you would kind of have to keep it in your opening hand, even if you don't plan to play it turn 1. So thinking about when you actually play is kind of interesting and tricky here. And you're thinking you have to win the game really before turn 9. If you compare it to Awaken the Masters, you say you have a N'Zoth Death Rattle Priest. Awaken the Masters is not going to be played, or I'm sorry, Amara Warden of Hope is not going to be played on turn 5, right? She's going to be played, I think, the ideal situation for Priest is that you're playing Amara Warden of Hope on turn 9, right? It's pretty unlikely you're going to play 7 Death Rattle minions, at least in a kind of defensive archetype that I'm thinking about, before turn 9. I mean, maybe if, aggro Death Rattle Priest became a thing, it'd be possible where you're playing more of the Death Rattle 1-drops. It's still pretty early. We could be surprised by just what exactly comes out. But my impression is that instead you're really going to be looking at a more defensive, longer game-oriented Death Rattle setup. And so Amara would be oriented toward that. You'd play her turn 9 and then play N'Zoth the next turn when she gets killed, right? So that's kind of how I would imagine Awaken the Masters and Amara. And basically, if you're a discard lock, Disco Warlock, right, you have to be able to kill the enemy player before turn 9, right? You have to kill them by turn 8, otherwise you're just going to lose most of the time. You're going to run out of cards in your deck. You're going to, if you've discarded 6 cards, ideally you have somehow drawn 6 additional cards somewhere along the line, usually through Malchezaar's Imp. So at that point, you've gone through a fifth of your deck, right? Unless you're running Prince Balthazar to have additional cards to discard, really, which is decreasing the consistency of your deck and increasing the likelihood that you'll have dead draws that you won't be able to play before you win. So, with that in mind, you also have to wonder, when could you actually play the Nether Portal, right? Can you play Nether Portal on turn 5? And I think there's just very, very rarely would you be able to actually play it on turn 5. Most of the time you will have discarded at most 3 cards by turn 5. And so hitting 6, you're really looking at turns 6 or 7 to play the Nether Portal, at which point it's only creating 2 3/2 imps, at which point you're going into turn 8. And so this is why Nether Portal is kind of weird, right? Is because Disco Lock is really predicated on winning before turn 9. Certainly before turn 9. Ideally before turn 6, like turn 5 or 6, you're winning. So Nether Portal then is great in the sense that, generally your concern is that a Disco Lock is just going to lose in any game that goes to fatigue. And maybe the Nether Portal would keep you alive longer in a game that where someone managed to heal a lot or managed to get enough taunts out that you were close to running to fatigue on your deck. And so I know there's the Lakkari Fellhound now, so there will be 2 additional cards that you can discard from that. But again, unless you're doing that with Malchazar's Imp already down, I think you're still going to have a pretty hard time really discarding enough that you will be able to play Nether Portal before turn 6 or 7, probably more often turn 7. At which point, it's spawning its imps on turn 8, which is the turn that you need to win by. It's pretty tricky. And during that time, it has been working against you because it's one fewer card that you have played to activate these discards, right? When would you play it? You'd probably play it. You'd have to really play it before turn 4 if you're going to play Lakkari Fellhound on turn 4. So you'd probably have to play it like maybe turn 3. Really nice would be Soulfire with Malchazar's Imp. So you'd actually play the Lakkari Sacrifice, Malchazar's Imp, and then the Soulfire. That would begin your discard process. Because in this situation, it's that or you're playing a Voidwalker or a Flame Imp on turn 2, in addition to the Lakkari Sacrifice. So you're not discarding on turn 2 is basically what it comes down to. You're not discarding turn 1, you're not discarding turn 2. So it's turn 3 where you do your first discard maybe, then turn 4 you get 2 more discards, turn 5 maybe 2 more, but still by turn 6 you would not be able to play the Nether Portal even if you gained it that turn because you'd played your 6th discard. You would have discarded your 6th card. So for the archetype, I think it's pretty rough, right? It seems so strong in the games where it is going to get on the board. I'm sure people will actually manage to play it. Some people will find a way to make it work. But for a deck that really is predicated on usually winning by turn 8 or 9, it's going to spawn at most like 4 imps before the game is going to end. So anyway, that's my impression, right? You would have to play Doomguard to activate it on turn 5, but usually that wouldn't even be enough. You'd still have to play your second Doomguard and then the I don't know, man. It seems very strong, but it will be actually very, very difficult to get off, and it would be making your deck worse before you actually manage to get it off. So that's my thoughts on Nether Portal. A very intriguing card that actually will be very difficult to use. Thanks for watching.